dive on in with introductions here.
Okay, recording is started.
Hello everyone, and welcome to today's structured conversation. Our conversation today is, what does neuroscience have to do with assessing student learning and development, with Dr. Marilee Bresciani-Ludwig, Professor of Post-Secondary Educational Research at San Diego State University. We're so pleased to have you with us today, Dr. Bresciani. So my name is Whitney Brown, and I will be serving as your moderator for today's session. And on behalf of SAL and the Professional Development Committee, I thank you all for participating in today's structured conversation, and an extra thank you again to our guest speaker, Dr. Bresciani. A few logistics before we get started. Feel free to adjust the size of the chat box on the left to more closely monitor your conversation. And I encourage you to participate by asking questions, sharing comments, or providing feedback throughout by using that chat feature and using the various other tools offered in the menu located above the chat room window. You'll see that you can insert emoticons into the chat using the Show Emoticon button. I'll test that right now. You'll see I gave a little smiley face, so feel free to use those little widgets throughout today's session. You can also indicate if you've stepped away from the session using the Step Away from Session button indicated here. At any time, you can also raise your hand and indicate that you have a question that you would like to ask, and we can turn on your mic and you can chime in with that question. But you can also certainly chime in with questions throughout using the chat box. If you have any other questions about logistics, feel free to chat in the chat room as well, and I can help you throughout today's session. So with that, those are our logistics, and let's get started with today's structured conversation. I'd like to give a brief introduction to Dr. Marilee Bresciani-Ludwig. I mentioned before that she's a professor of post-secondary educational leadership at San Diego State University. But prior to that, she served as Assistant Vice President of Institutional Assessment at Texas A&M University in a variety of student affairs, academic affairs, and alumni relations leadership roles at various types of institutions. So she has a wealth of knowledge and experience. She has consulted with over 200 institutions on assessment and accountability matters, preparing institutions to meet and surpass accreditation standards within the USA and many other countries as well. She's also a leading author of 6 books on assessment and student learning and outcomes-based assessment program review. She has developed and delivered several courses on assessment and student learning, and serves on the editorial board of the Journal of Research and Practice in Assessment. Dr. Bresciani is a reviewer for the Australian Quality Assurance Agency and also a managing partner in an international assessment and enrollment management consulting firm. She holds a PhD in Administration, Curriculum, and Instruction from the University of Nebraska, as well as a Master's of Arts in Teaching from Hastings College. So with that, please join me in welcoming Dr. Marilee Bresciani with a conversation about what does neuroscience have to do with assessing student learning and development. Welcome, Marilee.
Thank you, Whitney, and thank you to all of you who are taking your time to join into this conversation. I'm really honored to be here with all of you. Let's get started with a chat room participation with regard to this question: what is the commodity of the higher education industry? And I understand if there are some trigger words in there, like commodity and industry. And I also respect that we are well aware that this is a dialogue that's been going on in the federal government for quite some time and is actually ramped up with regard to the use of terminology around what is the commodity of the higher education industry. So feel free to use the chat window and share your perspective on this, or raise your hand and Whitney will open up your mic. What is the commodity of the higher education industry? Yeah, Kristen says many see it as a job now. Yeah. Success and social change. Mm-hmm. Right. And I'm counting on Whitney to watch the window to help me out as well. Career training, the experience itself. Yes, thanks, Whitney. Yes, so we're seeing already some of these words writing about, we hope that it's social change, but many do see it as the job itself, like getting the job or the degree, and that's the output. So we have this conversation that's happening at a federal level and for some of us at the state level. These are our performance-based funding indicators. And the challenge here is that when we think about it at this high level, and then we go backwards to design, if you will, and think about how is it that we're designing and delivering and evaluating this. It becomes quite disconnected. What is perceived as the commodity of higher education and what we see as our role in contributing to that, and then further disconnected oftentimes by how we evaluate our contribution to that. And in particular, student affairs, we've been intentionally focusing on what are the outcomes of this workshop, what are the outcomes of this leadership curriculum, and how am I evaluating this? Then we sometimes don't reconnect it to this quote-unquote commodity. Now, some of you mentioned that perhaps we need to shift our focus. There is some dialogue in the chat around, well, many see it as a job, but I'd like to think of it as social change. We're creating social change agents. And I love this quote by Albert Einstein, because we can't solve problems with the same kind of thinking that has created them. We can't resolve problems with the same kind of thinking that's created them. And when I think of this, I think of how did we get to commodity of higher education being a job? How did we get there? Well, it requires us to shift our focus and really look critically at how we've designed learning and development. So if we want to take back, if you will, that education is a transformational process, that we're actually inviting students into our academies, whether it's online or face-to-face or a bit of both, and however they're coming in and whenever they're coming in during their lived experience, they're coming in, and the idea is that we want to create a transformational process. Learning and development is transformational. However, we've looked at human beings as if they're these mechanized beings without emotions. You know, it's like park the emotions at the door as you enter the classroom. Park your lived experience at the door as you enter this classroom, and I'm just going to dump this knowledge. And of course, this came about through our massification of higher education. Massification was great in that it provided opportunities to more students. Massification was not great because we began to systematize the learning and development opportunities, and in so we sort of lost the human being. So what happened is that we started to think about the learning and development experience very linearly. Like, okay, students come in, we'll do a pre-assessment, they come in here, we have this experience designed for them, they move across, they take this course, they may do this co-curricular experience or this co-curricular experience, and even as these red arrows indicate, we might dip down and take institutional performance indicator measurements or surveys at particular times. And we also may be engaged in outcomes-based assessment or competency-based assessment. The challenge of this is not necessarily in its design, but in reality, this is more of the student experience. This is adopted from Baxter-Magolda's self-authorship, the meaning making that students engage in as they go through their learning and development experience. As student affairs professionals, we know this, like we live it. This is our day-to-day. Yes, we are engaged fully with the emotional human being. And so as they are coming up against what Baxter-Magolda would call crossroads experiences, where their identity is challenged or their values are challenged or the way they make meaning is challenged, knowledge intake falls off or knowledge application falls off. And again, we may still have these performance indicators coming in, but in fact, as we're doing outcomes-based assessment or outcomes-based assessment, it looks like students might get dumber as they go along. And we've all read these manuscripts about how critical thinking is declining or writing is declining. Well, is that true, or is it based on where we take the measurement? If you look at the second arrow and you look at where just look at inputs, it looks like the students are getting dumber, but that's probably not what's happening. What's happening is this human experience of interacting with so many different people and different environments and all of that sort of thing, all of that real life thing that's causing dissonance. In 1996, the Student Learning Imperative Student Learning Imperative was written, and it is a document filled with a lot of wisdom. And one of the phrases in that document that I love states that learning and development are inextricably intertwined. Inextricably intertwined. And since then, me included, has done an injustice to this. We've tried to separate outcomes as here's learning outcomes and here are development outcomes. But the reason I started doing that is because I couldn't find the real cognitive neuroscience evidence that learning and development are inextricably intertwined. So I dug in. And what we did find is, voila, in fact, this is true. Learning and development are inextricably intertwined, and we often do an injustice to this truth in the way that we measure learning and development. So the theoretical characterization of this statement from 1996 is that human beings are bundles of neural processes. Right? So we're all these neural beings walking around and interacting with other neural beings, and everyone is having a completely different experience, and that experience is true for that person. So we're trying to design systematic learning and development experiences that we know one size doesn't fit all, yet in our massification, we're systematically designing these opportunities, we're systematically evaluating them so that we can systematically improve them, all as a result of trying to influence behavior in the student. And so our assessment measures are, first off, our design of these learning and development experiences is focused at trying to influence these neurocognitive skills. And these are skills that we now know from neuroscience are changeable, that the brain is malleable. The whole neurological system, not the whole neurological system, but parts of the neurological system, parts of the brain are malleable, and therefore we can actually influence these neurocognitive skills. The question becomes how. So if you're looking at the slides, you'll see an image of a brain, and in case you're wondering whether I have one at this point in time of the presentation, that's my brain. So that's my brain in a functional magnetic resonance imaging, a functional MRI, magnetic resonating imaging device. And these types of tests have brought us into an awareness that certain parts of the brain are plastic, if you will, so neuroplasticity. And what neuroplasticity really means in the context of learning and development is this: what you pay attention to and focus on changes certain structures and therefore functions of your brain. So what you repeatedly pay attention to and focus on changes certain structures and therefore functions of your brain. And while this is a complex process that I am overgeneralizing for this brief webinar, so I have this John Muir quote that I love, is when we try to pick out anything by itself, we find the hitch to everything else in the universe. And this is true also about our neurology. But if we look at the particular parts of the brain that we know can be changed through education and training, we see these parts of the brain. And I'm looking down at the chat window. Does anybody recognize one of these labels in the brain, and might you want to play with defining it, or raise your hand if, and Whitney can open up your mic. So labels of the brain, is anything familiar to you that you've heard of and that you want to define? So we're looking at the chat window. Amygdala emotions, yes. Thank you, Melissa, yes. Amygdala emotions, yes. So amygdala, center for fight, flight, freeze, and fornicate. And I make the joke that doesn't that explain a lot of student behavior? When that part of the brain, the limbic system, and by the way, a lot of hormones are influencing that area, right? The emotional process, the limbic system. But when the amygdala is activated, and this could be, you're different from me, or that's a concept that conflicts with my values and my beliefs, or steps. The amygdala gets activated and it recruits other parts of the brain. And of course, this is a hard wiring. This was important for our survival, to be able to survive. But the thing about the brain is that it doesn't differentiate between a self-attack thought, like I'm an idiot because I don't know this answer, or I'm an idiot, I just said that, or an attack comment from another person, like, oh, Marilee, you're an idiot, or whatever, or a grizzly bear, like running right now into my room. I was thinking of a joke. So Betsy DeVos joke. So anyway, the amygdala gets triggered. It pulls offline many parts of the brain, one of them being the prefrontal cortex, and that's the center for, yes, thanks, Christian, that's it is decision making, it's anticipating consequences, it's analytical reasoning. It is all of those things that we need for decision making, being able to filter out truth from perception, or understanding that my perception may be different from your perception, and how might I move in this way. So the amygdala gets fired, it pulls offline the prefrontal cortex, and also, as Elizabeth pointed out, the hippocampus is involved with memories as well as emotions. Yes, because hippocampus is where short-term memory is recalled and stored, and the memory is processed in other parts of the brain. But if the amygdala is heightened, think of what that does for, if emotions are heightened, think of what that does for memory, recall, and storage. And I think we can all recall experiences where we've been emotionally charged and we're like, I can't think of that person's name, or I can't remember what I'm even supposed to, I can't remember the answer right now, whatever it might be. So, and there's more on here. The ACC and the insula have to do with body awareness and bringing about an awareness of where emotions reside in the body so that we can first become aware of them before the amygdala gets triggered. So what I love about this is, again, we can see the very tight interconnectedness of emotions and learning and development. They are truly inextricably intertwined. And I love this quote by Arnold Bennett, because it says there can be no knowledge without emotion. To the cognition of the brain must be added the experience of the soul. I get goosebumps every time I read that or hear that or speak it. And what I love about this is it brings back to the core of what student affairs professionals have been trying to do, which is to validate and affirm every individual's lived experience and say it has value. Every individual's lived experience is true for them and it has value. And how do we now cultivate awareness of that, attention toward that, and then emotion regulation so we can bring diverse lived experiences together and dialogue around new content or old content and think analytically about it without suppressing emotions or denying them or avoiding them. Well, when we think about assessment, so we've now thought, okay, we get that there's a lot of neuroscience evidence to validate the design of these learning and development experiences and how, and in a moment, and in neuroscience also gives us some clues about how to deliver training programs, if you will, that will help shape these neurocognitive skills. So bringing together emotion and thinking, if you will, that's oversimplification, but basically the point. But what I think when we move toward assessment, what I think is really important to note is that the reason that we know that these parts of the brain are malleable is, yes, it has to do with having brains in scanners and going through particular activities and seeing what changes over a period of time and what doesn't. But it also has to do with first-person self-report. And historically, again, feeling very convicted, I among others have said, wow, we really can't depend on first-person self-report. It's not accurate. So what seems to, that seems to be true at times, but what also is true is that we can cultivate more accurate first-person self-report. We can cultivate that through training. And if we're still using direct evidence and indirect evidence, we can then begin to see how we can influence these neurocognitive skills that, if you want to switch the language and say learning outcomes at the top, like reflection, ability to pay attention, ability to regulate emotion, and again, that does not mean avoid, suppress, or deny, but also with this idea of inhibitory control. So rage is coming up because someone has either been triggered or I've been the trigger, and all of this emotion is coming, that we can actually cultivate skill sets for students and faculty and staff to be able to not act out on that, but step back and reflect. So we can also cultivate more flexibility around use of working memory and cognitive flexibility. We might term it as analytical reasoning or critical thinking in a learning outcome, but this ability to hear and acknowledge and hold diverse perspectives and consider them as we approach rule use. How will I choose to behave now? And how might I behaved before? How might that change based on my ability to reflect, etc. So coming back to this and hopefully weaving this together to this point, the student learning and imperative of, I'm looking again at I can never remember the date, 1996, which said learning and development are inextricably intertwined. We now have a wealth of neuroscience research that supports that statement. And we also, the work that we've been doing in student affairs for so long, but we've been doing it in perhaps a linear way, or we've been doing it maybe more so for student affairs and as a, I'll catch the student if I can, or maybe they'll come to me if I can, that that process may not necessarily be really cultivating our ability, the design and delivery, so our ability to actually get the data, get the evidence on how well we're doing that. Does that make sense? I got distracted because some sort of message popped up on the screen and I didn't know if it was important. So the idea is that we know how to intentionally cultivate attention, the ability to pay attention on demand or bring back a wandering attention, emotion regulation, to be able to become aware of emotions arising in the body that might inhibit cognitive flexibility or behavior, or just ability to entertain another thought that's different than mine, and awareness into all of that, so that we're building in more reflection. And I put in here compassion. Compassion neuroscience is just emerging, so I don't have that data. We're working on that right now. But the idea of offering kindness, to offer kindness to self and to others as we engage in these really difficult dialogues that lead to decision making. So again, we know that we can intentionally cultivate that, and the way that we intentionally cultivate it is pretty funky. And again, it's stuff that in student affairs we're doing, but we're doing in a 1-hour workshop, or we're doing on a one-on-one. So, or we're encouraging students to take care of themselves, to be in nature, to have movement, focused movement with breath, to journal, actually pen to papers, what they're experiencing, what they're feeling, and to step back and really reflect. And then in the bottom left-hand corner, that looks like people still sleeping, but they're practicing a body scan, which is just practicing where do emotions reside in the body. And the point of that is to cultivate awareness and attention to that, so that before emotions become visible behavior, the one experiencing the emotion can utilize strategies like focused breathing to down-regulate that amygdala and up-regulate the prefrontal cortex, so that choice, compassionate choice, can be made. So we know this exists. We now have a bunch of neuroscience to support it. I'm not going to say to validate it, verify it, or affirm it, because it's emerging, still emerging, but to support it. Yet when we think about how we're still delivering learning and development, we've got these linear processes of courses. Take these courses, and there's nothing wrong with that. Get your knowledge here, right? Take these courses. But we're still saying, oh, it doesn't really matter that you have someone to make meaning out of that learning that's happening and your lived experience. As student affairs folks, we know that that's important, but the way that we've designed the learning and development experience would still vary. For some populations, we can do systematic, right, support, and others we don't, if that makes sense. So the idea here is that we've got the known stuff. We need to emphasize the curriculum that supports the facilitated experiences, or the meaning-making aspect. And this allows the messiness of the unknown, first off, for the student to step into that, and for us to embrace that this is new, fairly new and emerging science. Student affairs folks knew this innately. We're getting the science to support or affirm these practices. So what does this all mean for assessment? Well, it means first that as typical in assessment, we go back to intentional design. Where are we providing outcomes? Where are we articulating outcomes? And where are we providing opportunities for students to cultivate these very important neurocognitive skills, or you could call them learning outcomes? And I'll just go over this quickly because I want to make sure you all have plenty of time to chat. But the idea would be an applied curriculum would be content, right? Those are the courses. But where are we in the co-curricular being very specific about a reinforcement of cultivating awareness? And I, again, emphasize compassion here, this offering of kindness, the feeling for of another. Just as an aside, we know that we understand from recent research that feeling for another doesn't completely cut it, that there needs to be a motivation for action, like I think of restorative justice or something like that. And so the definition in the research that we're doing for compassion is 4 parts. It's a feeling for, an understanding of another person's pain and suffering, a desire, like a motivational desire to alleviate that person from their pain and suffering, and then an action part. So anyway, where are we intentionally designing that into the curriculum, and where are we evaluating it? For all of these allegedly ineffable learning outcomes, they are no longer ineffable. Not only do we have pretty sound psychometric inventories that are free that we can use to evaluate these outcomes, but we can also go back to or emphasize these reflective student learning portfolios. So the idea is that even if on the degree acquisition part of the learning and development journey is still linear, take this course, then take this course, or take this sets of course, and then take this sets of course. Even though that might still be linear, we can look at how we're designing the student success experience to say these very important non-cognitive skills, cultivating reflection and awareness and attention and emotional regulation, we can build in the opportunities very systematically, again, for students to cultivate those, and we can gather evidence in the reflective student learning portfolio in addition to the inventories, because I recognize we can't, it's not affordable to put all of our students in little fMRI machines or stuff like that. So the idea of this is to put a framework, and I'm welcoming your questions very soon, put it and comments and ideas. Basically the idea is to put a framework that learning and development they're inextricably intertwined. We likely, in my lifetime, will still have a very linear way that we design these opportunities. Nonetheless, if we begin to embrace that this acknowledge and affirm and continue to tell the story that this is the learning and development experience of the students, when we reach in still with our performance indicators and our dashboards, if we have students whom we are intentionally cultivating reflection, so that self-report becomes an accurate self-report, then we can explain the student knew they were not going to perform poorly on that competency exam, and because of all the stuff that was going on in their life, and instead of saying, oh, great excuse, just get over it, buckle up, right, we'll say, take care of yourself and let's reschedule. Like, it'll be a real human-to-human kind of a experience. The other part of this is that we, and I know I'm preaching to the choir here, that we have to continue to step back and say, we need to allocate time for reflection. We don't learn from experience. We learn from the reflection of the experience. John Dewey said that a long time ago. And what we're understanding, again, through cognitive neuroscience and other neuroscience fields, is that it seems to be true. It seems to be true that if we don't provide the time to reflect and go, oh yes, this is how that's meaningful, this is where I'm using that, then we'll continue to have commodities of degrees and jobs. And we'll continue to lose the opportunity to explain that we're actually about a transformational process. And part of this means, really rethinking the way, as Albert Einstein said in the beginning, really rethinking the way that we design, deliver, and evaluate learning and development. Yes, we still want to take the snapshots. What is this workshop doing? But we want to do it in the context of how is this one workshop contributing to cultivating these malleable skills, learning outcomes. Reminding ourselves and the students that a 1-hour workshop isn't probably going to do very much, because we understand that that is not how neurology responds. Neurology, the brain, the body, responds to what I pay attention to and focus on, what I consistently pay attention to and focus on. So how are we providing those opportunities? Okay, so turning it back to you, what do you think? I mean, we can talk about whatever you want to talk about, but what makes sense to you here? What do you want to share? Raising your hand, using the chat window. What would it look like if we considered this in the entirety of the learning and development process for design, delivery, and measurement? Or anything else you want to talk about? I'm just checking to see if there's still people on. Yeah, really insightful. We've designed assessment so this is why I love, okay, finish the sentence, Marilee. Okay, yes, we've designed assessment. I don't know who this is with this insight that shared this, because your name isn't coming up, but it says assessment depends on linear learning. So, and unfortunately, and I'm owning my role in this, we've designed assessment processes that reinforce linear learning design. So again, if we go back to, oh, Gavin, hi Gavin, that was Gavin. So if we go back to this idea, even if the knowledge aspects are linear, what we are doing in student affairs is trying to be, I think we are trying to embrace the nonlinear parts of this. And we're doing that by saying we've identified this particular group with this particular characteristics, and so we need to create the co-curriculum to go with it that supports the meaning making of this. But still, even in that, many of those are, well, whoever comes, comes. But the point of it, when you look at how learning and development is really happening, we're doing an injustice to the student's learning and development process. We're doing an injustice to assessment. We're doing an injustice to the student's ability to reflect and make meaning on their experience. Jan, hi Jan. I think we need to focus on reflective work. Yeah, in hopes to also help students make connections with all their learning. Yeah, and again, in a commodity-driven culture, what's the product that comes out of reflection? It's something that we don't honor in our commodity-driven culture. But what I think we can do, and this is what I've been trying to do with diving back into neuroscience and saying this, is listen, everything we all care about is not going to happen if we don't create spaces for reflection and opportunities to reflect. What else? Other thoughts? And I think in doing that, as Jan mentioned, we can make that reflective learning student portfolio even that much more powerful based on our prompts. And Gavin's saying again, I think this also means that assessment has to be more qualitative than it has been to capture the construction of knowledge. Well, I think mixed methods is wise. So, you know, we kind of go through these little phases, right? Like, oh, we're doing all qualitative stuff. Now we're swinging over here. We're doing all quantitative stuff. And I'd like to see us kind of come back and say, well, mixed methods are really helpful. Quantitative helps us really speak to what's there and what's not there in a very, I'm going to say, quick way. And qualitative requires more interaction and more time-consuming analysis, but we get a richer story to paint this picture. Kristen, hi Kristen, has me thinking about how key relationships are in providing multiple opportunities for students to reflect in the same areas. Oh yeah, beautiful. Yes, they are, aren't they? I've been working with an institution that I have to keep unnamed because that's the deal. But and we're working on this design of the project is not called the Pipeline for Student Success because but that's what I call it. But it's not what it's called. But it's this really intentionally as you look at the trajectory of and. Let me back up. We have a lot of data on how students go through certain degrees. The invitation here is to look at that data, use it, and then map the co-curricular onto it, okay? So we see this now, you can do some kind of predictive analytics of when students are really freaking out and when you want, and before that, have those required touch points, right? It's these interactions are as important as your classroom time, right? Oops, I scrolled down too far. Ashley, let me just check. Yes. It seems that reflection and integration of learning is the ultimate outcome. It brings all the other outcomes we are measuring together in a meaningful way. Oh, yeah, I love that, Ashley, yeah. Yeah, and I think, you know, as I came, again, really convicted about, we don't have reflection as an outcome in many of our institutional learning outcomes. We have critical thinking, and quite frankly, don't even know what that is. From a neurocognitive perspective or from a measurement perspective. So maybe it would be wise for us to start breaking these big outcomes that we're getting criticized for anyway, for not delivering, back down into saying, okay, where are we cultivating a student's ability to pay attention? Where are we cultivating awareness of their emotions? Where are we cultivating their ability to reflect and sit in the unknown or sit in the dissonance? Thank you. Keep it coming. Gavin is saying, how do we think about assessment as a web? How can we create an assessment web, not just an assessment plan? Ooh, fun. That's a good question. I think this is not likely the answer to that question, Gavin, and I want to invite our colleagues on here to respond as well to all of this. But I do think, I come back to the reflective student learning and development program, and the reason I do that is because I'm getting old. And so I've accepted that in my lifetime, I'll likely not be able to change this linear way that we deliver content because we're so tied to it from funding formulas, from organizing faculty workload, blah, 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 blah. But if I accept that and then put on the reflective student learning and development, and we do this in our master's program, we give reflective assignments during the breaks and during the linear design, because that's when there is more space for reflection, right? So in the courses we try to design reflection in, they're getting reflection in their graduate assistantships. This is obviously a master's program in student affairs stuff. But in the breaks, so what would it look like if we started to design that in the context of the linear in the context of the linear frame that we're stuck with and in the moment. We're so focused on doing, right? So what if we require students to come and it doesn't take that much time. The 2-minute, there are research studies that on 2-minute journaling prompts, so you give students a prompt, a reflective prompt, you set a timer for 2 minutes, they just write with pen and paper, and then you change the prompt. You can do this, you can give 3 prompts in 6 minutes, and what they found is it heightens students, significantly heightens students' well-being and connection back to themselves and to the life they're living. Oh, cool, 6 minutes. But where are we systematically doing that? And look at all the data then you'd have, you know, in the journal prompt. What else do you think? And I'm also happy to hear from the people who are like, this is stupid. Oh, Whitney, great question. Does culture or race and ethnicity have any implications regarding the influence of neuroscience on learning and development? Yes. Spoiler alert, we're going to be, so let me put some context on this before I do the spoiler alert. At this point in time, neurologically, remember when we had that slide, let's see if I can find it just for context. When we talked about neural processes, at this point in time, we don't see any evidence that there are any significant differences based on any observed or self-reported characteristics of identity. Okay, so any observed or self-reported, self-identified identities. So we don't have any data to show that the neural processes are different. Nonetheless, keep in mind that this is a human being having a lived experience in the environment, and what we're seeing in our data is that, and we always hate to speak even in this general term, and I'm going to do it because I'm overgeneralizing because we just have a little bit of time. Students of color come in with significantly higher stress and anxiety. Big duh, right? The point is, even if it's Hispanics in a Hispanic serving institution, they come in with significantly higher stress and anxiety than white students. Again, big duh. But now we're collecting the data. The point is, why do we just throw them all in the same experience? Okay, well, we don't. We say we have these other support programs to help ease the shock of transition. But still remember, it can't be a one-time shot because of this. What you pay attention to and focus on is literally changing the structure and function of your brain. So if I'm going into classrooms and I'm still getting microaggression triggered, etc., I need the curriculum alongside this if I can't change what's happening in the classroom for that student, that would be, of course, the long-term solution. If I can't change that, then I need to know that I have to have a different attention, emotion, cognitive regulation curriculum because students are coming in. Now that's a massive overgeneralization that I just made, and I get that. But these were all, thank you, Nicole, these were all non-first gen. Yeah, trying to control for that still. Isn't that wild? Yeah, so I think that what is, you know, awakening me, like I feel, I hope that I'm 52 and just figuring this out, but, and I probably don't have anything figured out, and in another 20 years I'll be like, oh dang, remember when I said blah, 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 well I was wrong. But the point of this is, I think, is that we can't play around with this anymore. First off, I'm tired of going to Washington, D.C. and having legislators say, if we know so much about student success, why isn't it evident in the design of learning and development and how we measure it? And I'm like, it's a really good question. So we know a lot about student success. So why isn't it evident in the way we design and deliver it and evaluate it? Yeah, I think that's, I don't know, I feel like that's on me. And I know it takes, as one of our colleagues was saying, I think it was, I can't remember if it was Kristen was saying, this means we really got to reallocate time to collaborating, to, and we also are challenged by that, to collaboration and reflection. Just as an aside, I'm really enjoying working with UNESCO MGIEP, this research fellowship this semester, and heading there in about 5 hours, heading back to India. And I love the way they work. When I go into their office, they're all, there's a whole bunch of functional areas. It's like when you walk into a marketing company, they've got all of these collaborative spaces, and then they have these breakout rooms where they're going in and talking about particular projects that they're working across on. And I know we're so big and complex in some of our universities and colleges. The intentionality of bringing people together is really kind of cool. There are so many confounding factors. How do we tease them out? You know what? We don't. We can't. At this point in time, and I'm going to go back to, let me see if I can pull it up really quickly. This is true. Any neuroscientist I talk to will tell me that when I do this and I have the dialogue I just had with you, it's a little dangerous, because while these are primary functions, they're not solely functions of those things. Our whole neural process that we're trying to coach into learning and development is so inextricably intertwined that when we're fooling ourselves at any time that we try to do cause and effect. And so I'm looking back at, how did we get to this dialogue? Like, why are we having these conversations? And I think we have fooled ourselves into thinking that if I just design a really high quality assessment plan or a research study, I'm going to be able to make a statement of fact. No. I mean, we really can't. But what we can do is we can be good stewards of our resources, time, students that we have to serve, the colleagues that we work with. I mean, I really feel like going back to the whole point of outcomes-based assessment was to be very intentional about what we were creating, how we were creating it, and then evaluating it to see if it seems to be working in the way we want to, not to be absolutist, right? Not to be absolutist about it. I don't know. Anyway, it's 11:26. I'm having a blast, and I could talk about this all afternoon. That I need to respect your time, and Whitney, do you have any closing?
I do. Did you have any, or just wanted to give a chance for any final questions to trickle in before we wrap up today. Did you have any closing thoughts to share with us?
Me or the participants?
Either or.
Okay. I just want to come. I want to come in the chat room and hug everybody. It's really been my pleasure and honor to be with you all today. I know you're all. I see some names in there. Not everybody has their name there, and I know you're doing. Hi, Jan. I know that you're doing really amazing work. So it's an honor for me to be here. I'd love to hear any more thoughts. I'd welcome any more questions. I'd welcome learning discovering what you think about this stuff. Yeah. I guess we also have some references. If you want to see some of these practices in place, you're welcome to check it out. And shameless plug, they're also in here. But Gavin wrote the foreword too.
Awesome. I'm glad that you mentioned that as well, because I have my copy here that I can't wait to dive into on a long weekend. So I look forward to indulging more about this topic. So it's been such a pleasure having you today and getting to hear from your experience and your research. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Great. So thank you everyone for joining today's conversation as well. I'd like to let you know that we have recorded today's session and we'll be emailing that to you later this week along with the PowerPoint, and so you'll have those references from Dr. Bresciani as well. So thank you all so much, and again, thank you, Marilee, for your time and your expertise today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Whitney, and thank you all. All right, take care. Bye.
Bye.